In August 2017, I had the opportunity to go visit the Wind River Range of Wyoming for the first time, and it was certainly quite an adventure. As I drove, even though it was toward it, even though it was cloudy in the evening, I could see it was a very impressive looking mountain range, even looking at it from over 20 miles away. And then the road to get to the trailhead, the Green River Lakes trailhead, was about 20 miles of gravel road. And as you got closer, you could see Square Top dominated the horizon. And then when you get there, there was a nice campground, and then the trailhead is right there, and you're right next to Green River, the first of the Green River Lakes. So I took a couple pictures, and then I went to set up my camp. And the next morning there was still clouds hanging around, but I was ready to plow ahead nonetheless, and the clouds were gradually breaking up as it turned to be a beautiful day. I was a little bit nervous about meeting a bear on the trail because I was so unfamiliar with the area, and it seemed like I was the only hiker on the trail. Anyway, eventually I did see this big bull moose, and there was another moose to the side as well. And fortunately, the moose seemed to be content just eating the grass, and I kind of bushwhacked around this area since I didn't want to just walk the trail and walk that close to him. And the views kept getting better as you would walk along the Green River. The trail pretty much paralleled the river and did not gain much altitude for about 12 miles, just following this valley, and Square Top continued to dominate the horizon. And there's another view of Square Top in one of the meadows. Some of the stream crossings were a bit challenging, but between walking on logs and using long logs as extra long hiking poles helped to cross these stream crossings. It was definitely a high snow year out there. And this is just more footage of the Green River. And then at one point the trail crossed the Green River over a bridge, and I got this picture. The reason that the river is green is because there's a little bit of glacial silt in the river. And here's the bridge that I crossed. Eventually I worked my way around Square Top to the other side, and I was eventually going to get to Tourist Creek, which I was going to then cross on this marshy meadow, and then a stream crossing. And I brought some Crocs just for doing the crossing. And this is looking at Tourist Creek, and I had to go up in through that drainage there, and went through this very challenging boulder field. Not technically challenging, but just physically challenging, having to step through all those boulders. And this is looking, you can see the river down below that I had to cross in the valley through the marshy area, and then all the boulders here on the other side. And this is just looking up more boulders. There'd be places where they were smaller, and then there'd be places where they were bigger, and generally it was better to stay where the boulders were smaller. And if you found areas of trees, usually there was some evidence of footpaths through the trees, and if I did it again I'd be able to go faster because I know exactly where the best way to go is, having been through it once. But this was just the typical terrain as you're working your way up Tourist Creek here. And you can see you always wanted to be in areas where there was less rocks whenever you could, because there was so many boulders. And eventually I got to the top of Tourist Creek, and the river continued to rage, and there was boulders everywhere. It was challenging just to find a flat place to set up a campsite for the night, and I was rewarded with this beautiful wildflower meadow. And then beyond that I did finally find a campsite, and this was the view outside of my campsite, this huge massive granite cliff that was on the other side of the stream. And one of the mornings I actually heard a rock fall down from there, and it was kept crashing and ricocheting, and I was glad I wasn't camped real close to the cliff, that's for sure. And so there's looking at my tent and the campsite there. and I hung my food over this tree so that it would be out of the reach of a bear, although I couldn't imagine a bear going through all those boulders to get up to the area where I was at. The next morning I had to work my way further up to get from this drainage to the next drainage, which would be the Wells Creek drainage, moving from the Tourist Creek drainage to the Wells Creek drainage. And when I got to about the high point of this ridge, there was a beautiful alpine lake at about 11,000 feet, and it was rewarded with a nice reflection of the mountain peaks that were on the other side. On the other side of this lake that was 11,000 feet, there was a lake or a small pond that was down below it, and you had to do one small class 3 section just to descend to this lake. But if you followed the right way, it actually wasn't too bad. And then you had to work your way across and then traverse across along this ridge to get to what's called Skinny Lake. So now we're going to see the descent down to this lake here. Lots of boulders, but nothing that a person couldn't handle with a little bit more stamina. There was some pretty wildflowers along the way. This is Scott Lake, which was lower down, and I actually didn't go all the way to Scott Lake because I was doing the traverse, and always trying to follow any grassy places where you could escape these massive piles of granite boulders whenever you could. So then eventually I worked my way towards Skinny Lake, right in the middle of that picture there. There's some columbines. I believe that's a state flower for Colorado, and they grow throughout the Rockies. So this little notch here in the middle, that's what I came down, headed towards Skinny Lake there, and just gradually working my way down the direction that I needed to get toward Gannett Peak. So this is now at Skinny Lake and looking up at Gannett Peak, which would be in the upper right of this picture here, and had to work my way wherever the going was a little bit easier and avoiding the cliff bands. You'd work your way up, and so that's what I did. Skinny Lake, once again, the water has a little bit of a glacial silt to it, so it's a little bit greenish in color. Another view of Skinny Lake, and here's working my way up, and you see there was a cliff band blocking my way, but I was able to work my way around by going to the right of it. And eventually I got to what was called the Minor Glacier, which was, really just a glorified snowfield, and was relatively easy walking when it wasn't steep. But then eventually I did get to a section that was a bit steeper when I got close to where Gannett Peak is, and the idea would be to work my way up that couloir that is going diagonally upward toward the triangular pyramid-shaped peak on the left side of this picture, and then once I got up on the ridge, then to work my way around the other way. So that was the plan. Unfortunately, I probably should have camped one more night and camped at Skinny Lake, and then I would have had enough time to complete my objective. As it was, I started hiking at 6:30 in the morning, and I got up to the highest point that I got to, which was basically the end of the snowfield, at around 12:30 in the afternoon. And I realized I was going to need to turn around, or if I went all the way to the top, I would have not gotten back to my campsite till well after dark, and considering that there's no marked trail, it might have been a little bit challenging doing that route finding in the dark. So I did choose to turn around at about 1,000 feet or 900 feet below what this summit would have been for Gannett Peak. But this was the views I had. This was the only remaining snow I had left to climb to get up the rest of that couloir there. And this is a panorama of the area. You see all these peaks and the snowfields and glaciers around them. Quite a sight there in the Wind River Range. So I descended and had a very good view looking back at Gannett Peak when I was near Skinny Lake. This Skinny Lake was definitely a very pretty area, definitely one of the nicer areas of the hike, and perhaps not quite as rough with plenty of grass around the area too. But in general, just about all the terrain was rough. You couldn't go too terribly fast. And so that was my Tourist Creek adventure. Here's just more pictures from the Tourist Creek area. A few pictures from my Utah trip mixed in. So this was the Indian paintbrush. This is passing by the lake 11,000 feet again. And just working my way on down. Lots of beautiful alpine flowers. The next morning, when, even though I was headed out and a little bit disappointed that I hadn't made the summit of Gannett Peak, I came down the Tourist Creek boulder field and kind of found my way a little bit better going down than I did going up, which was a good thing because just the boulders in one section were just like navigating a maze. But I found an easier way down in certain sections, and then found a relatively easy way to cross the river, like right here in kind of the middle right section. There's kind of a sandbar where I could go in only up to just below my knees in the river. On my way out, I had the most beautiful view of Square Top, and it was just amazing. Yosemite may have Half Dome and El Capitan, but the Wind Rivers have Square Top, and just a amazing view. Such a gorgeous valley there to be walking through. And toward the end of the day, the sun was shining on the peaks, and it was just spectacular scenery is all I could say. So may not have made the summit, but it was a great hike nonetheless. Okay, we gotta figure out how to stop this thing now.